So you've just modded your first Game Boy and you got a lot of games, but wouldn't it be easier just to take all your collection and to put it onto one cartridge to play on your modded Game Boy? Easy Flash sent over their Omega Definitive Edition for me to take a closer look at. Out of all the flash carts out there, this thing has a lot going for it, and I think you'll be really impressed with it. The big things for me are the ferroelectric RAM, which means it can keep your save even when it's powered off for long periods of time. It's also extremely power efficient, and it has lots of other features to it. I've been using this for the past 2 weeks, and overall I've been very impressed with it. If you're in the market for a flash cart for your Game Boy Advance, let's take a closer look to see if this one's right for you. As mentioned, I just modded my first Game Boy, and if you haven't checked out that video, make sure to check it out. This was a pretty neat kit, but I probably wouldn't recommend using this one. Although it was a fun process, and I loved the final result. I've been definitely looking for a good way to get this thing having some modern features. I wanted the ability to play all my games on there, including Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. I also was hoping to get some modern features like save states and a few other things. I've been using this for the past couple of weeks, and I have been absolutely blown away by the quality. It has a very simple menu, but it does work very well. I have all my folders on the main menu here. I've got my options set the way I want, but we're jumping ahead. So let's just hop in and take a closer look at the Easy Flash to see what it's about. You can get the Easy Flash Omega on AliExpress for a decent price. The Definitive Edition seems to go for roughly anywhere from 70 to 95 Canadian, depending on the sales at the time of writing. They have a few different versions as well. Let's take a closer look at their website to see what the differences between these versions are. First of all, they have the Easy Flash Omega. They also have the Easy Flash Reform and the Easy Flash Definitive Edition. I'm looking at the Definitive Edition here, but there's a few other kinds to look at. The Easy Flash Reform is basically their bare bones unit. This is just going to play your games, and it's not going to have all the extra bells and whistles. Moving up from there, the Omega is definitely where you want to start looking. This is going to support save states. It'll also move your saves directly to the SD card. It has support for a real-time clock. It has a sleep feature. We can also load games directly into their flash memory on board, so we can start those up even quicker than using the SD card. During the upgrade process, I actually bricked my firmware on my unit. With the help from Easy Flash, I was able to recover the firmware and I got it working again. Their highest end model does have a lot of features that the other one doesn't have. One of the biggest features is using ferroelectric RAM. This means if you save something and it loses power, it's going to be able to keep that save safe no matter what. This also supports a rumble function, Game Boy Advance, and DS Link transfer. We have DS web browser mode, DS RAM expansion mode. This one is also a little bit more power efficient. The battery is also really easy to replace on the board. If you do get this, I also recommend checking out their fact sheet here. This is going to go over everything about the cartridge and some of the modes and everything else. It's going to go over some of the benefits of using FRAM. Everything that you're going to want to learn about is in this PDF. I definitely recommend checking this out if you're going to go with this, or if you're just more curious about the product in general. You do also want to upgrade your firmware when you get this, and it's going to go over how to do that here. Just a disclaimer as well, this was sent to me by the company and it was shipped out from Retro Game Repair Shop. Regardless, I'm going to give you my honest thoughts to what I think about it. I've been using this for the past couple of weeks, so I have a lot to say about it. Let's open this up and see what comes in the box. In the box, you're going to get the cartridge itself. This doesn't come with any games, and you're going to have to provide your own. Since Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance games are pretty small, I'm just using a simple 32 gig micro SD card. I don't really recommend using more than 64 gigs, but they can work in this unit. First things first, you want to make sure to format this micro SD card as FAT32 or exFAT. I've gone ahead and made folders on this card for each different system, so I have 4 different folders. I have one for Game Boy, one for Game Boy Color, one for Game Boy Advance, and one for NES. I am also curious to see what this looks like on the inside, so let's pop it open and take a closer look. Make sure to remove the micro SD card before you open it so you don't damage that. With the cartridge open, we can see a few things. We have a battery for maintaining the real-time clock. We of course have the microSD card reader. This Ramtron chip is the FRAM. There's a little switch on the side to swap between the multi-game or the single card game mode. I'm just going to leave it in the multi-card game mode. On the back of the chip, we have a few extra smaller chips and an FPGA core in the middle made by AMD. This is a Spartan 6 FPGA core. I'm assuming this is maybe the storage or a little bit of RAM. I'm not exactly sure what these small chips are. My guess is some sort of storage. There's also a really small one on the bottom. But I do really like the design of this PCB. The black and gold looks amazing on there. This also slides in nicely to the Game Boy Advance. I've seen a few cartridges from AliExpress that are pretty hard to get in the cartridge slot. The build quality is excellent. This boots up quite quick. We're greeted with a little flash screen, then it immediately loads our microSD card. You can use the triggers to navigate the various menus. The first menu is going to show us all our games. We have a folder called Saver, which is going to be all our game saves. The second menu is going to be for if we load any games into the actual storage itself. On the options menu, we have a time, and we can go ahead and set the save state, reset, or cheat modes. We can also change the language. You can change the sleep key or the menu key. We can also set the game runtime clock in here. There's an auto save mode. And we can set the mode B to something else if we want. It's currently set to link mode, but I'm not really using this. By default, this LED is going to be enabled, but I do recommend shutting it off because it's pretty bright. On the top, you can see how bright that is. This LED is just going to breathe very slowly. I think this is pretty bright though, so I'm going to go ahead and shut this off. And it's disabled right away. On the last menu, it's going to give you a QR code for the manual and the hotkeys to use in the actual flashcard itself. But let's go ahead and try starting up a game. I'm going to go ahead and start Cave Noir. It's going to instantly load the game and create a save file for it. The game isn't going to fill the entire screen, but you can go into the menu by pressing the two bumpers. In the menu, we can do a few things like enable turbo for A or B. We can adjust things like the palette, and there's quite a few different ones here. We can adjust the gamma. In the other settings menu, we can turn on things like VSync, an FPS meter. We can have it auto sleep after a certain amount of time. We can swap the A and B buttons. We can even have it auto load the save state. This is a pretty cool feature. I've tried this in NES, but unfortunately it kind of bricked the game. I'm not sure if this is a bug with the actual software itself or if it was just NES. There's also a few different modes down here for Game Boy that allow you to change a few different other things. You can also enable speed hacks. The only two options we have are full speed or half speed. We can go ahead and enable a save state, and we can load from this menu as well. We can manage the SRAM here. There's a sleep mode, restart, which just allows us to restart the game, and we can press escape, which will take us back to the main menu. When we escape the game that way, it should create a save state. There's a lot of different boot modes when you're starting up a game. So if I'm starting up a Game Boy Advance game, I can do a clean boot, boot with add-on. I'm not really sure what this boot with add-on is. You can write to the flash memory, and this will show up in that second menu. This also allows you to load the game a lot quicker. This is probably a good idea if you're only playing one game at a time. You can also go ahead and change the save types. There's a few different kinds. I usually just leave it on auto. Most of the time what you're going to want to do is just use a clean boot when you're starting the game. This is going to instantly create a save file for the game as well. I like how easy it is to pull up the menu just by pressing both the triggers. I can't seem to pull up the menu on Game Boy Advance games, but it's easy enough to restart the unit and it shows up quick again. Another system that works really well on here is Game Boy Color, and it gives it a nice little border on the edges. You can bring up the menu in Game Boy Color by pressing the two triggers again. You can also turn off this border by checking the other settings menu. This won't show until you do a restart, but it does seem to work pretty well. It's a shame there wasn't a scaling option. I kind of wish that I could pull this just a little bigger. And I just hit my brightness sensor. It is nice how quick this thing loads. And getting back into the main menu is super easy. I'm also really happy to see that NES games work very well on here. They load up super quick. But this is one that I tried to create a save file on, and it's set to auto load, so it just goes to a black screen. I think this save has been corrupted because I can't even open the menu, and the screen is totally black. So I wouldn't recommend auto loading save states, and just load those manually. but when you have the save states set to load manually, they load pretty quick. I'm also not detecting any input lag when using this on my Game Boy Advance. It's pretty nice how this lets you take all your Game Boy Advance games on the go. I think for how much it costs, it's a pretty good deal. This lets you enjoy all your games on your native hardware. The menu also works on NES. There's a few other different options for the emulator for the NES. You can even change the region here, that's pretty neat. I would recommend using the auto save, but I wouldn't recommend using the auto load just as mentioned. The firmware is pretty easy to upgrade and just make sure to follow that PDF. Let's try loading a game into the flash memory to see how quick it loads. So I'm going to go right with NOR clean to load it into the flash memory, and it's going to go ahead and load that game directly onto the card itself. Be extra careful when you're swapping between the two modes because you can lose your saves. This is why I generally recommend keeping to one mode and leaving it there. I'm actually impressed with how quick this is writing too, that wrote quite fast. Let's try loading up Monster Rancher Advance 2. We have direct boot, delete, format all, load save file, and save the save file. So let's try doing a direct boot. Yeah, so that loads pretty quick. You can't access the hotkeys while playing a game from the flash memory, so you will have to reboot the system every single time. This is fine anyways, as it starts up pretty quick. This will stay in the flash memory until you delete it. I'm not sure what the format option does, but if I go ahead and delete that, it will remove it pretty quick from the flash memory. You can't load Game Boy games onto the flash memory, and you can't load Game Boy Color games. You can only write GBA games to the flash memory. You can probably rename these save files with .sav. I'm thinking that would probably work if you wanted to move these over to another handheld, or vice versa. You could probably move one of your saves files over if you rename it with .esv. You do also want to keep the kernel firmware on the microSD card itself. If you have a new firmware, just make sure to overwrite the old one. Generally, when I review products, I find a couple things that I don't like about it. Honestly, this flash card is pretty nice, and I really can't find many faults with it. I think my biggest gripe with it is it might be a tad expensive. At almost 70 to 95 Canadian, that's pretty pricey. But I think the features that this offers definitely outweigh the cost. Being able to bring all your Game Boy games with you on the go on your native hardware makes it definitely worthwhile for me. You don't need a crazy fast microSD card, but I do recommend using a branded one like the SanDisk I have here. Doesn't need to be an A2 card or anything fancy. I would also go no more than 64 or 128 gigs. 32 gigs is definitely still big, and I have tons of space left. The build quality is excellent, and I have no complaints with the actual hardware. It loads really fast, and I think it's pretty cool that they managed to use FPGA hardware on there. So what do you guys think of the Easy Flash Omega Definitive Edition? I'm definitely impressed, and this is going to be my flash cart for all my Game Boy Advances moving forward. I also like how I can just pick this out and put it in any Game Boy Advance and just continue my save. This is like having all your saves in one place, and it makes it easy to move things around. What do you guys think about this flash cart? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos, and as always, thanks for watching.